A day President Donald Trump has dubbed Liberation Day is right around the corner. That's when the majority of tariffs go into effect. Also, protests raging throughout Turkey and so much more. Here to discuss it all is our foreign affairs contributor, Lisa Daftari, the editor of the Foreign Desk, joining me from Los Angeles. Hello, Lisa.
Oh, great to be with you.
Awesome to have you with us as well. Okay, so Lisa, as I said, April 2nd, President Trump has dubbed Liberation Day because the U.S. tariffs go into place. And I did hear the White House secretary saying last week that it's finally a day that America will stop allowing other nations, friend or foe, to rip off the United States. So, Lisa, what is the American perspective on this? Is it really the Liberation Day, or do people realize it's going to hurt Americans too? Is it kind of split?
It is split, and it's all over the place. Look, the foundation and the idea behind this is obviously clear. This is something that Donald Trump, even before he even thought about being in political life in the '90s, I remember seeing him all over cable television and even local New York news channels talking about how America gets ripped off, that we pay
Yes.
way above our fair share, and other nations need to pay up. So we know that that's where he's coming from. Now, will tariffs work in the long run? You hear a lot of economists talking about how the idea behind it is good, but the implementation of tariffs have never gotten the results that he is looking for in this scenario. So obviously, and I hate to use the cliche, time will tell, because that is where we are right now. But you do have a lot of Americans who are supportive of Donald Trump, but fearful of what the tariffs will do in the short term, medium term, and potentially long term. And you have others who think, okay, this is part of the growing pains of making things fair, and we have to, just wait and see. Again, the time will tell kind of mantra comes into play. And you have others who are very, very critical of tariffs and very critical of Donald Trump really ruining the wonderful relationship that we have with Canada. The others really, the majority of people I actually speak to, regardless of whether they are for or against tariffs, do believe that that relationship is just such a natural and ironclad relationship between the Canadians and Americans that it will always go back to what it was, even though it is experiencing the current strains that it is.
Yeah, I know. It's almost like, why did he have to rock the boat? The relationship was so strong. And it's interesting that you say that, like, he was been talking about this since the 90s. Why didn't he do this in his first term? It's so interesting. He gets in and right away it's this, but he had 4 years before to do that. Not that we wanted to see that happen, but you're right. I think that, like, short term, it's going to just really, really send a ripple throughout the United States, Canada, everywhere. But maybe in the long run, but I feel like it would take years and years for those manufacturing plants to start actually taking fruition. And last week, we had the Alberta premier. She was back in Florida, highly criticized, by the way, on this side of the border for her doing this. But she wanted to go there to speak to Republicans about tariffs and how they're not necessarily great for American businesses. And she says she saw billboards down there in Florida saying that tariffs hurt Americans, and she was pleased by that. So she also accompanied podcaster Ben Shapiro to a fundraiser at PragerU. And then she said Shapiro was discussing tariffs on his podcast and saying they're not necessarily such a great thing either. So did you catch his podcast? What's he saying?
No, I actually didn't see this specific podcast. I do listen to Ben Shapiro here and there. He's a friend and colleague, and of course PragerU as well. I love all those folks down there. They do great work. So if they're talking about this, I'm glad that the Republicans are able to have this very civil discourse between in the party, and I think that that's really what makes America America. And I think the Canadians do this as well, where there's, hopefully we can work towards a place where we may not agree on everything that Donald Trump does or everything that the Democrats do. But when they're in office, we have to do what's best for the country. And right now, I think, Donald Trump may be alone on this, but look, he's also an out of the box politician. This is not something we have had before. And to your point about why hasn't he done this before, in his first term, he did do many things to show that this is his ideology, meaning pulling out of the UN Security Council, or giving a real good talk to NATO and to the EU and to all these other acronymed organizations, whether it is the United Nations or any other groups, or giving money to various Palestinian funds that were using that money for terrorism, to say, we don't have to just pay the checks just because this is what America has done. And I think a lot of the initiatives behind this administration, whether it's in Doge or pulling out of, again, many of these global groups, is to say, we have to look at what's best for our country. And if every country looks at global relations in that way, that will make every country great again. And I think that in that capacity, I think a lot of Americans, even the ones who are left of center, do understand that and are all for it. Now, the only thing that remains the mystery here is, will this particular tactic work for the outcome that he desires? And that's what we'll wait and see. So far, the markets here are not showing a positive, reaction to that. And that's very natural to say, this is going to affect us. Obviously, prices are going to go up. We're going to be affected by tariffs, very drastically in the next couple of weeks, and we'll have to wait and see how this all plays out. Will he get the outcome he wants, or will this just be something that we have to kind of smooth out with our global partners?
Right. And speaking of Trump, it's been reported that while he was speaking to media on Air Force One, I believe it was, he was saying that, so he's hearing people say that he should run for office again, and that he might try to make it so that he can do this. So Lisa, is it just a tongue-in-cheek thing? I mean, he's only been in office, 2 months now? So do you think he's really going to try to change things? I believe, what is it, the Constitution he'd have to change? Or is it just a bit of an off-the-cuff comment that the media is sort of running with?
Maybe a bit of both. It's a bit distracting right now to have this conversation, only because, and the reason I say this is because, just as someone who observes politics, when the opposition, there's a percentage of this country that, majority wanted him to win. That's why he won the election. And there's those who did not want him to win. And then there's, within that group of people, there's the fringe that have derangement syndrome and they hate him, and he has, there's very strong opposition against him, is what I mean. So when they're talking about you being, an anarchist and, kind of changing the Constitution and going against the Constitution and being, anti-American, which is all, all the very harsh criticism that there is out there, it's not the right time to say that I'm going to alter what the laws of this country to stay in power. Yeah. That's what dictators do. So we don't want to really have that conversation right now. We want to focus on all the good that he can do and has done and will continue to do, hopefully. And I want to remind people, he's only been in office since January 20th, and all the things that they have been able to accomplish, both domestically and globally. And I think that's what he should focus on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Lisa, FBI Director Kash Patel told lawmakers on Wednesday that U.S. adversaries such as China and Russia have started to target the northern U.S. border with Canada. So he's saying that this is because of, quote, effective resolution at the southern border with Mexico. And that shift has been aided by deployments of thousands of U.S. military troops to the border who have assisted CBP agents with everything from reinforcing barriers to surveillance of potential illegal crossers. So could we see the same at the Canada-U.S. border?
Different. But yes, same in the sense that we do need a focused strategy for the northern border. Again, it speaks to the fact that Canada and the United States have to be on good terms. They must be on good terms. We have to fight these common adversaries and threats together. Seeing this report, Jeanette, was kind of surprising to me because we have known this all along. Even when the southern border with Mexico was much more of a threat for the United States, we would speak on BCN. We would talk about how this is also a threat, whether they come through the United States and continue northward towards Canada, or if it's a separate threat where they're coming in and using that border. Regardless, our adversaries, our joint adversaries, consider this a vulnerable border, and that's an issue. And we've talked about this on your program. So I know that the Canadians know about it. I know that that those who are savvy and politically, aware understand that in the United States. Now the question becomes, what do we do about it? And that's where we work together to make sure that there is law enforcement presence on both sides of the border. That we understand that this is being used by adversaries, and then we try to, basically we harden this soft target, and that's exactly. And this report hopefully will bring more attention to the fact that this needs to become a priority.
Okay. Last week, this was on my list, but we didn't have the opportunity to talk about it. Turkey. So there's a lot happening there, and it looks like Istanbul's mayor was jailed on charges of corruption, and there have been protests raging throughout the city with police unleashing pepper spray. And I guess last week, the protests moved to university campuses. So, Lisa, what's going on over there, and why is all of this happening?
Yeah, this is the start of most political movements we see around the world, where there is some sort of impetus, in this case being the mayor of Istanbul taken in on what many consider trumped up charges. People come onto the streets to protest that, and then it becomes a much larger protest against the government. You see people holding up signs of Ataturk. Ataturk was a Turkish leader who modernized Turkey, was very much a nationalist, someone who believed in Turkish pride and secular Turkish pride and democratic Turkish country that allowed women to have freedoms, to move away from the political Islam and to just have a secular country. Obviously, majority of Turkey practices Islam, but Erdogan being a much more hardline leader, Islamist leader, and what's the irony of all this is, while everyone's running out onto the streets, while they're trying to stop people, there has been outages. They kind of want people to not organize via the internet and social media. There have been crackdowns, obviously. But in the middle of all of this, Erdogan doubles down on his support for Hamas. So it's not a good look. The people are speaking. They're talking about going farther away from extremism, and he's moving closer to it by, pledging his support for Hamas in the last 24 hours. So, we shall see. Will the crackdowns be, so horrific that the people go back home? This is what we've seen, in Iran and many other countries. We saw this all throughout the Arab Spring as well. But the people of the Middle East are speaking out. I think Turkey is a very interesting country because the government has been basically playing both sides. They are Islamists, but they also want to be NATO. They also want to be close to the West. They want to have trading partners with the West, but at the same time, look at what the people want. This is not what they want. And we'll see if they can quiet down the masses, or if these protests will in fact continue. It's a historic moment for Turkey for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned Hamas in there. So Israel's military issued evacuation orders on Monday for most of Rafah and suggested it may soon launch another ground operation in the city after its ceasefire with Hamas ended. So what's the latest there, Lisa?
Right. So I want to just bring everyone up to date. The ceasefire ended because Hamas would not release any more hostages and wasn't agreeing to an extension or a new ceasefire agreement. So Israel went back to resuming its war. And I want to remind everyone there's two priorities for Israel in this war. Number one is to get the hostages back and get as many alive back as possible. And number two, to diminish the threat, or if not to decimate Hamas completely as a complete, existential threat to Israel, along with Hezbollah and all these other terror organizations that it's fighting on its multiple fronts. So in this case, we're seeing that Israel will be continuing its military fight against Hamas and issuing evacuation orders. This is something that you're not hearing on the mainstream media. All you hear about is how Israel broke the ceasefire, how Israel is killing Palestinians. Look, this is a war. That is for sure. This is a war. There are casualties, but to really misrepresent the facts of the actual war is irresponsible journalism, and we're seeing that everywhere. It's rampant, and the biggest of media platforms are doing that. So thank you for bringing this up and to really actually talk about the evacuations to get people. I mean, what country is fighting its enemy and then issues evacuation orders or goes through door to door or makes calls or gives out flyers to evacuate areas to minimize the civilian casualties. That usually doesn't happen in war. I mean, this is, all the biggest war experts have talked about this. So yes, now this is the second part of this will be Rafah, just like we saw in the aftermath of October 7th. I also want to remind people, how long have we been in this war? I mean, since October 7th of 2023, and we still have hostages in custody, in Hamas custody, including Americans. So, it's not to be believed that this is, this is the way that they're doing it. I know there's a new report that came out today by the UK. This is the most robust report, over 300 pages, really detailing all the horrific acts from a 91-year-old Holocaust survivor to a 14-day-old baby that were killed on that day, including more than 1,000 others, and hostages taken, all civilians. I mean, really horrific stuff. This is makes movies about terrorism and shows like Fauda and Homeland in Tehran, makes them look really like child's play in comparison to the real actions and horrific barbarism of Hamas.
Yeah, all right there. It looks like we're out of time here, Lisa, but I appreciate once again having you on as always.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeanette.